minutes to 9, plans to change the law to make it easier for people to change gender should be paused to allow the potential consequences of allowing people to declare their own gender to be given greater consideration. That's the judgment, at least, of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, which is a UK-wide body, and it's passing its judgment on plans by the Scottish government to change transgender laws in Scotland. Now, the government in Holyrood declined our invitation to appear, but they have the strong backing of the Scottish Greens, and we're joined by the MSP and spokesperson on equalities, human rights and justice, Maggie Chapman. Morning to you.
Good morning. How are you doing this morning?
Well, I'm not bad. More to the point, how are you in the face of this call on you, on the Scottish government, to pause, to consider the objections that people have to this change in the law?
As I said on my social media yesterday, I'm actually really quite angry about this. The Equality and Human Rights Commission contributed as an organisation to both of the previous two consultations that we have had on Gender Recognition Act reform in Scotland, and they both agreed with the reforms. So between November 2017 and now, we have to ask ourselves, what has changed at the EHRC to make them change their mind like this?
Well, what has changed is that, according to the chair of the organisation, Baroness Faulkner, who is, of course, a new figure who's been appointed, but what's changed is she described it as a polarised debate and said it is necessary to deal with the concerns that many people continue to express about the consequences of easing gender recognition.
I think you're right to point out that she is newly appointed by the UK government, and I think that calls into question the impartiality of the EHRC. We have a very, very clear process that the Scottish government has gone through from November 2017, when they first consulted on proposals to bring in reforms. Then they consulted 2 years later on draft legislation. EHRC, other organisations, LGBTQI+ organisations, all had the opportunity to contribute, and the vast majority of those in Scotland agree with the need for these reforms.
But majority isn't really the point in this case, is it, Ms. Chapman? Because you're talking about competing rights. You know that there are many very prominent women, not least in the Scottish government. The Scottish Finance Secretary have concerns about the consequences of changing gender recognition laws for women's rights. And isn't it sensible to pause, to try to win people over, to try and accommodate those views?
The rights of trans people and the rights of women are not competing. They are not in competition here.
That is a statement of opinion, not a fact.
Well, actually, if you look at the UN Rapporteur on human rights, they say exactly the same thing.
No, but prominent women in public life don't agree with you, Ms. Chapman. So that's what we do, isn't it, when we have disagreements? We try to say, is there a way through the disagreement? Or is it your view that you should say, well, to hell with you, I don't agree with you, we're just ploughing on?
And sometimes it is the role of government and it is the role of parliaments to go through due process and remember that when legislation is placed before the Scottish Parliament, it is scrutinised very, very closely, and this reform will be no different. When the law when the draft legislation comes to us, it will be scrutinised very, very carefully. There will be an opportunity for debate to be had.
Why do you think it's right to ignore people who disagree with you?
I'm not trying to ignore them.
Well,
I'm saying they.
You are. You've got your opinion.
Well,
the Equalities Human Rights Commission have told you to pause. Well, you've spoken quite a lot. I'm asking you a question. The Equalities Human Rights Commission in the UK have listened to this debate. It's a very polarised debate. It's a very difficult debate. And they say, look, there are people with anxiety about women's rights in terms of when it comes to in prisons, for example, competing in sport, taking part in society more generally. Why is it not sensible, is the question I'm asking you, to try to reassure people about those concerns rather than just to plough on?
There will be opportunity, ample opportunity in the process of the scrutiny of the legislation for those concerns to be well discussed and well aired. But I think that I must be able to make this very important point. The reforms to the Gender Recognition Act that the Scottish Government is proposing and that the Scottish Greens have been calling for a very long time don't affect the Equality Act 2010, which is actually the issues that the Baroness raised in her letter, the issues you have just spoken to me about, women in sport, those kinds of things, those are issues to do with the Equality Act. There are already mechanisms in place. If organisations, if sports facilities require or have some reason to exclude trans women, they can already do that.
Well, clearly they don't agree with that piece of analysis. Do you think your critics are transphobes? Is that what you're hinting at but not saying?
I think many of the critics are transphobes. I think many people might be misinformed because, as you have said, this debate has become very, very polarised, and there is an awful lot of misinformation out there.
Okay.
What the Gender Recognition Act reform seeks to do is to minimise the trauma and suffering that trans people have been going through for decades in order to have their true gender identity recognised in law.
Maggie Chapman of the Scottish Greens, thank you for